I stepped off the plane with a mix of exhaustion and excitement that I hadn't felt in years. The last 6 years had been a blur of uniforms, strict schedules, and endless training. I had devoted myself completely to the Army, teaching young soldiers the tactics and discipline I had learned over my lifetime. I thought of my home, my husband, and my son, imagining how they were waiting for me, counting the days until I returned. My heart was heavy with the longing I had carried for so long, but also bursting with anticipation. I could almost hear the laughter of my child echoing in the halls of my house, the soft murmur of my husband welcoming me home. As the taxi drove me through the streets of my hometown, memories of my early life rushed back. I remembered the first time I held my son, the way my husband looked at me with pride, the soft warmth of family dinners. I had fought to provide for them, to ensure their safety, to make them proud, and now, finally, I was coming back. I imagined the reunion, the tears, the hugs, the relief washing over all of us. But none of that prepared me for the shock waiting behind the front door of my home. I parked and walked up to the house, each step heavier than the last, each heartbeat louder than the city noise around me. I reached the door and raised my hand to knock. The door swung open and I froze. A woman stood there. She was holding a little girl, no older than 7, and her eyes flicked to me with a combination of curiosity and caution. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was calm, polite, but there was a quiet firmness in it. I blinked, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. I'm looking for my home," I said carefully, my voice barely steady. She glanced down at the child in her arms, then back at me, a small, polite smile forming. "This is my home. Are you lost?" Something inside me twisted. The child she held, the resemblance to my son was striking. The same dark eyes, the same small hands, the same faint curve of a smile I remembered so well. My mind raced, refusing to believe what it seemed to be telling me. "No," I said slowly, trying to steady my shaking hands. "I don't think so. I think I'm in the right place." She studied me for a long moment, as if weighing the truth in my words. Then she stepped aside. "You must be Madison," she said. Her tone was neutral, almost polite, but there was a subtle edge that made my stomach drop. The world seemed to tilt. I recognized the name, my own name, spoken in a voice that was not my husband's. I stepped inside hesitantly, the air thick with tension. My eyes swept over the living room. The furniture was arranged differently, the walls painted in softer, warmer colors than I remembered. Everything was familiar yet alien, a home I once knew transformed into a place I no longer recognized. And then he appeared. My husband, the man I had loved for years, walked through the hallway, carrying the weight of time and secrets on his shoulders. He froze when he saw me. For a moment, his eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing his face, and then he quickly masked it with a polite, cautious smile. "Madison," he said. His voice was calm, controlled, but I heard the tremor beneath it. "I didn't expect, you're home early." I looked at him, taking in every detail, every line of his face I hadn't seen in years, every flicker of guilt and fear. My chest tightened. My son, my real son, my flesh and blood, was not in his arms. The child he had been raising for the last 7 years, another child entirely, looked at me with wide, curious eyes. I swallowed hard, forcing my emotions down. I had trained for situations that required discipline, control, and strategy, but nothing could prepare me for this. My husband had moved on, betrayed the life we built together, and now I had to decide how to confront it. I had to understand the full scope of the deception before I could act. Days passed as I observed silently, carefully, pretending not to notice the subtle ways my husband and the other woman interacted. Every smile, every whispered conversation, every hidden glance was a puzzle piece in a cruel mosaic. I watched my son from a distance, noticing how he hesitated when he saw me, sensing perhaps that something was different, that the world he knew had shifted in ways he couldn't yet understand. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked through the house alone. The walls seemed to close in around me, memories of my past life mixing with the painful present. I found letters, photographs, and mementos that revealed the depth of the betrayal. My husband had not only moved on, but he had erased my presence in subtle ways, reshaping our home and life around another woman. I felt anger, yes, but also clarity. My mission was no longer about reunion or forgiveness. It was about reclaiming what was mine. I began planning, quietly, methodically. Every action, every word, every step would be calculated to expose the truth, to dismantle the life he had built on lies, and to protect my son from the hurt he had unknowingly endured. The days became a strategic game. I watched, waited, and gathered information. I recorded conversations, noted inconsistencies, and observed every interaction between my husband and the other woman. Each small piece of evidence strengthened my resolve. I was no longer the woman who had left for duty years ago. I was a mother, a protector, a force determined to right the wrongs inflicted upon my family. When the moment finally came to confront him, I did so with calm precision. I revealed what I had learned, exposing every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal. His attempts to deny, to hide, to manipulate were futile. I had anticipated every move, prepared for every excuse, and my voice carried the authority of someone who had endured and overcome. And then the revenge began. Not impulsive, not reckless, but deliberate and unstoppable. I took steps to secure my son's safety, to dismantle my husband's financial and social stability, and to assert my rightful place in our family. The process was painful, slow, and consuming, but it was necessary. With each action, I felt a sense of justice, a reclamation of power that had been stolen from me. Finally, the day came when my son was returned to me. The reunion was quiet, intimate, and overwhelming. He didn't fully understand the complexities of the past years, but he knew, instinctively, that he was home. And I, standing there with him in my arms, felt a profound sense of victory, not over my husband, but over the forces that had tried to destroy my family. We were free, finally, to live our lives without fear, without deceit. And as I looked into my son's eyes, I knew that the journey had only just begun. The world had tested me, pushed me to my limits, and forced me to confront betrayal in its most painful forms. But I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The future was ours to claim, and nothing would ever take that from us again. The days after reclaiming my son were strange and surreal. The house felt alive again, but not entirely mine yet. Every corner held memories of the years I had been gone, and the traces of the life my husband and his other family had built in my absence were impossible to ignore. I watched my son carefully, noticing the way he hesitated at doorways, the way he clung a little too tightly when we walked down the hallway. He was happy to be with me, yes, but there was confusion in his eyes, a quiet sadness I had not anticipated. The years away had left marks, invisible yet deep, and I knew I had to guide him back, carefully, slowly, like someone untangling a fragile thread. I began by rebuilding our routine. Breakfasts, walks, bedtime stories, small rituals to anchor him, to remind him of the bond we shared before the years of absence. I spoke gently, always aware of his emotions, aware of the fragility of his trust. Every word mattered, every touch mattered, because I had missed so much, and now every moment counted more than life itself. I watched him smile, watched him laugh, and each time it happened, my heart swelled with relief and a bittersweet ache. But life was not going to give me peace so easily. My husband had not forgiven, nor had he forgotten. The court battles had ended in my favor, but the subtle warfare did not stop at paperwork. I noticed the way he lingered near our neighborhood, the suspicious messages, the attempts to manipulate friends and family against me. His other wife had vanished quietly, likely realizing the power I wielded now, but the echo of betrayal lingered. I had to be vigilant. I had to ensure that neither he nor anyone associated with him could harm my son or me again. Every day, I reminded myself of the discipline I had honed in the army. Patience, observation, planning. These were not just tools of combat, they were tools of survival. I applied them to my home, to my family, to the slow, careful restoration of our lives. My son needed stability, and I needed control. I began documenting everything. Strange encounters, unexplained phone calls, attempts to interfere with my son's schooling, subtle threats disguised as casual remarks. Every piece would matter if the war escalated again. Evenings were the hardest. Sometimes I would sit in the quiet of my room, staring at the shadows, feeling the weight of all I had endured. Memories of betrayal played like old films in my mind. The way he smiled at me, the way I trusted him, the way my son had been slowly alienated from me. I hated him, yes, but more than that, I hated the helplessness I had felt, the years wasted, the absence that could never be replaced. And yet, beneath the anger, a cold determination settled in. This was no longer about revenge in the moment. It was about securing the future, about ensuring that my son would never face the pain I had faced. I reached out to old friends, people who had known me before my deployment. I needed allies, people who understood the stakes, who could provide insight, support, and assistance. Some were eager to help, some hesitant, but all provided pieces of the puzzle I had to solve. Slowly, methodically, I began rebuilding a network, a shield around myself and my son, ensuring that no one could exploit our vulnerability. School was another battlefield. My son had been enrolled in a school that catered to the other family's convenience, not his needs. He had friends, yes, but also invisible scars, moments of exclusion, of subtle bullying, of confusion about his own identity. I took charge, meeting with teachers, counselors, and administrators, insisting on a plan to integrate him into a stable, supportive environment. It was exhausting, bureaucratic, emotionally draining, but necessary. Every conversation, every note, every action was a step toward reclaiming not just our home, but our lives. And then came the first direct challenge. A letter arrived one afternoon, thin and formal, from my husband's attorney. It was a subtle threat, hinting at visitation rights, at questioning my custody, at undermining my authority. My heart froze for a moment, but then I reminded myself of the preparations I had made. I read the letter carefully, noting every implication, every weak point, every potential advantage. I would respond, not in fear, but with calculated precision, ensuring that my son's safety and well-being remained untouchable. I drafted my response, backed by evidence, documentation, and legal counsel. Each paragraph was deliberate, each word a shield, each sentence a barrier against intrusion. When the letter was sent, I felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. The battle lines had been drawn, but I was ready. I had spent years preparing for moments like this, and now I wielded that preparation with lethal precision, though in a manner far less physical than I had once known. In the evenings, I spent time with my son, telling him stories of courage, of perseverance, of fighting for what is right. I did not tell him the full truth, not yet. He was too young to bear the weight of betrayal and revenge, but I planted seeds of strength, of resilience, of knowing that justice could be claimed when the heart and mind worked together. I saw him beginning to trust again, to laugh freely, to sleep soundly. Every small victory for him was a victory for me, a confirmation that the struggle was worth it. Yet the tension never fully left. I caught glimpses of my husband around town, brief encounters that left my pulse racing. I saw the anger, the frustration, the realization that he had lost control. But I also saw fear. Fear that I had not just returned, but returned stronger, smarter, and ready to act without hesitation. I began to understand the subtle power of presence, the way simply being there, calm, controlled, and unwavering, could unsettle even the most confident adversary. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the rhythms of our new life began to take shape. Mornings were filled with laughter and play, afternoons with learning and exploration, evenings with stories and bonding. I noticed the transformation in my son, the subtle shifts in his behavior, the reawakening of joy and curiosity that had been stifled. And I felt a deep, consuming pride, not just in reclaiming him, but in guiding him back to a life where he could thrive, where he could be safe, loved, and secure. And yet, I knew this was only the beginning. My husband's subtle threats, the lingering presence of betrayal, the scars of absence, all of it remained. The true test was not over. The emotional warfare, the legal maneuvers, the social manipulations, all of it had to be navigated with care, with skill, with relentless attention to detail. I was no longer a soldier in a uniform, but a strategist in a battle for the heart, mind, and future of my family. At night, I would sometimes lie awake, listening to my son's soft breathing, feeling the rise and fall of his chest against mine. I would remember the moments of fear, the years lost, the betrayal that had shattered my world. And then I would plan. I would imagine scenarios, countermoves, defenses, and attacks, all aimed at protecting him, reclaiming what was ours, and ensuring that the shadows of the past could never touch us again. I had learned something crucial. Revenge was not just about retaliation. It was about preparation, control, strategy, and timing. It was about understanding the full scope of the battlefield, legal, emotional, social, and using every tool at my disposal to secure the victory that truly mattered: the safety, happiness, and future of my son. Even as the sun rose over our small town, casting golden light across our home, I remained vigilant. I watched, I listened, I calculated, and I planned. Every smile, every laugh, every small act of joy for my son was a triumph against the betrayal, the lies, and the years of absence. And I knew deep in my soul that no matter what came next, I would be ready. I would fight. I would win. And together, my son and I would carve out a life filled not with fear or deception, but with strength, love, and the unbreakable bond of family. The first signs of trouble began subtly. At first, it was small things: letters misdelivered, strange phone calls that ended in silence, messages from old friends warning me to be careful. I kept calm, observing every detail, noting every irregularity. Years in the army had taught me patience and vigilance, and now I applied those skills to protect my son and myself. I was no longer just Madison the mother. I was Madison the strategist, calculating every move with precision. One morning, I noticed the neighbor across the street acting strangely. He lingered near my driveway, pretending to water his plants, but his gaze kept drifting toward our house. I watched quietly from the kitchen window, my coffee untouched, my mind analyzing the situation. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I recognized the behavior: surveillance, reconnaissance. I noted it, filed it away mentally, and prepared. My son played nearby, unaware of the invisible threat, trusting me completely. That trust became my weapon, my shield, my reason for vigilance. At school, things began to shift as well. Teachers mentioned unusual questions from other parents, whispers about custody, and attempts to subtly discredit me. I stayed calm, listening carefully, collecting every word, every hint of manipulation. Each attempt they made was a small ripple in a pond, and I watched how the waves spread. I had learned in the army to anticipate, to counter, to turn even the smallest advantage into a decisive one. Every whisper, every rumor became ammunition for the war I was now waging. My husband's presence was more direct now. He appeared at town events, pretending casual concern, engaging in seemingly innocent conversations with mutual acquaintances. But I knew the truth behind the smiles and polite words. He was testing, probing, trying to find weaknesses. I allowed him his illusions. I smiled politely, nodded, and let him believe he had control while I gathered evidence, watching, documenting, planning. Each interaction strengthened my understanding. Each gesture revealed a crack in his armor. At home, my son and I continued rebuilding our life. Mornings were filled with breakfast and quiet talks, afternoons with learning and play, evenings with stories and preparation. I watched him grow stronger, more confident, more connected to me. He was healing, and in his healing, I found my own strength. But the shadows of the past were never far. Letters arrived with threatening undertones. Messages appeared on my phone from blocked numbers, and small incidents reminded me that victory would not come without continued vigilance. One evening, the threat became undeniable. I returned from a late meeting with a lawyer, ready to discuss next steps in protecting my son legally, and found evidence of forced entry. A window had been tampered with, scratches on the frame too precise to be random. I felt a cold rush of awareness, the familiar adrenaline of danger I had once known on the battlefield. I did not panic. I did not cry. I observed, documented, and planned. The intruder had made a mistake, and I would use that mistake to ensure safety and accountability. That night, I installed security cameras and motion detectors, mapping every corner of the property. I traced possible escape routes, identified vulnerable areas, and prepared contingencies. My son slept unaware, and I held him close before leaving him in his bed, whispering promises of protection he couldn't yet fully understand. This was my duty, my war, my calling. The betrayal of the past had forged me into someone unyielding, relentless, and unstoppable. The next confrontation came sooner than expected. My husband tried to manipulate mutual friends to gain information about my whereabouts, my routines, my actions. I confronted him indirectly, through letters and legal notices, demonstrating knowledge, control, and unyielding vigilance. His facade began to crack, small fissures appearing in the mask he had worn so long. He underestimated me, and that underestimation would be his undoing. At home, I began teaching my son subtle lessons: awareness, caution, resilience. Not as a child's fear, but as preparation for life, for the world that could be both kind and cruel. I observed how he interacted with other children, how he interpreted social cues, how he protected himself in small ways. I guided him, always gently, always with care, reinforcing his confidence and strength. Each moment of his growth was a victory, a reminder that the years lost could be rebuilt, that our bond could become unbreakable. I also began reconnecting with old allies from my military life. Their expertise in surveillance, strategy, and investigation became invaluable. Together, we developed a plan to ensure that my husband could no longer threaten our safety. We studied his routines, documented his behaviors, and prepared contingencies for any direct or indirect action he might take. It was meticulous, exhausting, but necessary. I could not allow even a shadow of his betrayal to touch my son again. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across our yard, I received a message from an anonymous source, a warning that my husband was planning a direct challenge, that he intended to confront me and attempt to regain some control. I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, but also clarity. I was prepared. I had anticipated this moment. Every step I had taken, every observation I had made, every plan I had drafted led to this confrontation. When he arrived, it was not with aggression but with calculated charm. He smiled, attempted casual conversation, and tried to gauge my reaction. I responded with calm, measured words, revealing knowledge he thought I did not possess. Each revelation tightened the noose of accountability around him, each response demonstrated control, and each moment reminded him of the power he had lost. He had underestimated me, and now he faced the consequences. The confrontation escalated over days, a battle of wit, strategy, and patience. I anticipated every move, countered every attempt, and turned every challenge into a demonstration of my strength. Legal action, community alliances, and careful observation became tools in a campaign to protect my family. And through it all, my son remained at the center, unaware of the full scale of the conflict, but feeling the safety, love, and confidence I provided. In quiet moments, I reflected on the transformation. I was no longer simply a mother reclaiming her son. I was a strategist, a protector, a force that would not yield. The betrayal I had suffered had forged a new identity, one capable of navigating treacherous waters, of outmaneuvering opponents, and of ensuring that no harm would ever come to the child who depended on me. Even as the days grew longer and the tension thickened, life at home continued to improve. My son laughed more, slept more soundly, and began to feel the stability he had long been denied. I watched him, proud and vigilant, knowing that each step forward was a victory in the larger war we were fighting. And I knew that the confrontation with my husband was only a chapter, not the conclusion. More challenges would come, more tests of patience and strategy, but I was ready. I had learned, I had prepared, and I had become unbreakable. And so we lived, cautiously, carefully, thriving in small victories while preparing for the battles to come. The war was far from over, but I had gained something invaluable: clarity, power, and the unwavering bond of a mother and son determined to survive, thrive, and reclaim the life that had been stolen. The first crack in his composure came when he realized I was no longer just observing, I was acting. Months of planning, of patience, of silent preparation had culminated in this moment. I had gathered everything I needed: legal leverage, evidence of manipulation, witnesses who had seen the lies, and allies who understood strategy and execution. For 6 long years, I had waited, endured, and honed my instincts. Now, the moment had arrived to turn the tables completely, and I moved with precision. It began with the small, almost imperceptible moves. I sent letters to key contacts, subtly informing them of his deceit, his failures, his attempts to manipulate not only me but our son's life. I reached out to his colleagues, his friends, and even his family, presenting evidence they could not ignore. Every word was carefully chosen, every sentence a subtle blade. I watched him from a distance as tension began to flicker in his eyes. He was trying to maintain control, trying to appear calm, but I could see it. The recognition that I had the upper hand, and this time he had no defenses strong enough to stop me. Home became both my fortress and my stage. I moved with deliberate care, teaching my son lessons of vigilance and self-confidence, making him feel secure while I orchestrated the final stages of this battle. I was patient with him, understanding that the years of absence had left marks that could not be erased overnight. His smiles, his laughter, his small achievements, each was a victory, a reminder of what I was fighting for. And yet, beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, one that would reach its peak sooner than either of us could have imagined. The first direct confrontation occurred in court. My husband attempted to challenge the custody arrangement, hoping to exploit perceived weaknesses. He underestimated me. I presented my evidence calmly, methodically, showing not only his betrayal but the subtle ways he had tried to control and manipulate our lives. I spoke with a quiet authority, each word measured, each point reinforced with documentation and testimony. He faltered, flinched, and for the first time in years, I saw fear in his eyes. The mask he had worn so long slipped, and I realized that the power I had regained was not just legal. It was psychological, emotional, and absolute. Outside the courtroom, the battle continued. I met with his associates, friends, and contacts, subtly dismantling his influence, exposing the truth while maintaining my own reputation. Each revelation I released was precise, calculated to ensure maximum impact with minimal backlash. He was scrambling, reacting to a force he could not predict, a presence he could not control. And I, watching from my vantage point, felt a surge of vindication. Every small victory built upon the last, each step drawing me closer to the ultimate goal, reclaiming the life, the home, and the child that had been stolen from me. At home, the tension was less visible but no less real. I taught my son to recognize subtle cues, to understand when something was not right, to trust his instincts. Not through fear, but through awareness and empowerment. He began to respond with confidence, with independence, with the quiet courage that I had instilled. Watching him grow, watching him thrive, was the sweetest form of revenge, a triumph that no court or confrontation could ever fully capture. Then came the day of the direct confrontation at home. He arrived unannounced, believing he could intimidate or manipulate. I was prepared. I met him calmly at the door, my son safely inside but aware of the presence, observing with quiet curiosity. His usual charm, his practiced politeness, failed against the quiet authority I projected. I spoke plainly, directly, revealing knowledge he had hoped I would never possess, evidence he had hoped remained hidden. His reaction was immediate. He stumbled through words, tried to regain control, but I was relentless. Every attempt he made to deflect, to explain, to charm, was met with calm precision. I could see the realization dawn in his eyes. He had underestimated me, and now he was entirely exposed. This was not about anger or vengeance in the impulsive sense. This was about justice, about reclaiming power, about showing that betrayal and deceit carried consequences he could not avoid. Over the next several days, I executed the final phase of my plan. Financial leverage, social exposure, and legal authority all combined to strip him of influence and control. I moved decisively, never recklessly, and always with the protection of my son as the highest priority. Each action was a calculated step, each victory a measured blow against the deception that had marred our lives. I watched as his composure unraveled, piece by piece, until he was no longer a threat but a cautionary figure, a reminder of what happens when trust is broken and deceit is left unchecked. Amidst all this, my son flourished. He began to speak more openly about his feelings, about the confusion he had endured, and about the bond he felt with me. His confidence grew, his joy returned, and the light in his eyes became a constant reminder that the fight had been worth every effort. Each smile was a confirmation, each laugh a signal that we had reclaimed not just a legal victory, but the heart and soul of our family. I also made sure to document every step meticulously. I knew that one day, should it be necessary, I could recount every detail, prove every fact, and protect our future indefinitely. My husband's attempts to undermine or interfere were neutralized not through brute force, but through planning, preparation, and unwavering resolve. I had transformed betrayal into strategy, absence into authority, and loss into victory. And finally, the day came when he understood completely that he had lost, not just in court, not just socially, but emotionally, psychologically, and morally. The realization broke him in ways that were silent but unmistakable. He could no longer threaten, manipulate, or control. The power had shifted entirely. And I, standing strong, fully prepared, and unwavering, felt a sense of triumph that went beyond mere revenge. This was justice. Retribution and reclamation rolled into one decisive victory. That night, as I tucked my son into bed, listening to his steady breathing, I felt a calm that I had not known in years. The house was ours, the past confronted and controlled, and the future open, safe, and full of possibility. I knew that the battles were never truly over, that vigilance would always be necessary, but for the first time I felt unshakable. My son was safe, our bond stronger than ever, and the man who had tried to destroy us reduced to irrelevance. As I gazed out the window at the quiet street, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights, I realized that revenge, when executed with patience, precision, and care, was not about cruelty. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully yours, protecting those you love, and ensuring that betrayal could never again threaten the life you fought so hard to preserve. And in that realization, I found peace. I woke up that morning feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of confrontation, planning, and small victories that added up to something much larger. My son slept soundly beside me, his breathing even and peaceful. I watched him for a moment, letting the sight settle deep into my chest. This was what I had fought for: security, safety, happiness. And now, finally, it felt real. The final steps of my plan were simple, yet precise. My husband had been weakened, his credibility gone, his alliances fragile, his control over our lives gone. But the last stage was more than just legal or social. It was personal. It was about reclaiming not only what was mine, but also ensuring that he would never again attempt to manipulate, deceive, or hurt my family. I reviewed every document, every piece of evidence, every strategy, making sure no detail was overlooked. Perfection would be my signature, and nothing less would satisfy the years of absence, the betrayal, the waiting. I began with the formal proceedings. I met with lawyers, judges, and counselors, presenting the final evidence with the quiet authority I had cultivated over years of training and strategy. Each motion, each statement, each submission reinforced my position. He tried to speak, tried to counter, tried to manipulate, but by now I had anticipated every move. His attempts were weak, scattered, ineffective. I remained calm, composed, and unyielding, the image of control he could never break. Outside the courtroom, the psychological game continued. Friends, neighbors, and associates were made aware of the truth, not maliciously, but firmly, using facts and evidence to show the reality of his betrayal. He could attempt to argue, to charm, or to manipulate, but the network I had built, the allies I had cultivated, ensured that he could no longer influence or intimidate anyone. The battlefield had shifted entirely, and I stood firmly in the center of it, unshakable. Home was the next stage. I had rebuilt it, room by room, moment by moment, as a sanctuary for my son and myself. Every corner spoke of safety, every detail of our life was tailored to his well-being, every ritual reinforced trust and connection. I watched him play in the yard, his laughter ringing out like music, and I felt a quiet pride that no betrayal could touch. The years of absence had been painful, but they had forged me into someone stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. He attempted one last maneuver, a personal challenge, hoping to regain a shred of control, perhaps even believing he could intimidate me into compliance. I met him calmly, deliberately, allowing him to speak while I observed, analyzed, and waited. His words were empty, filled with old excuses and feeble attempts to manipulate reality. I responded with facts, evidence, and a calm authority that left him speechless. This was no longer a man capable of deception. He was a figure of consequence, a cautionary tale, a defeated adversary in a battle he had already lost. I watched the subtle realization dawn in his eyes. He had underestimated me, and now there was no way to recover. The power had shifted entirely. I was no longer the woman who left for duty, uncertain and vulnerable. I was the mother who had returned, strategic and unbreakable, reclaiming her life, her child, and her future. The magnitude of this victory was not in anger or vindictiveness, but in the absolute reclamation of what had been stolen. In the quiet moments that followed, I focused on my son. He was beginning to understand in small ways the depth of what had happened, though he didn't need the full story. He felt safe, loved, and empowered, a living testament to the success of my struggle. Each day, he grew stronger, more confident, and more joyful. I nurtured that growth, guiding him, teaching him, loving him fiercely. Finally, there was peace. The legal battles were over, the psychological warfare concluded, and my home was ours. I watched my son run through the yard, his laughter echoing against the walls I had restored, and I felt the weight of the past years lift from my shoulders. The years of absence, betrayal, and loss had forged something unbreakable, a bond between mother and child that no one could sever. Evenings became a sanctuary of calm and joy. I cooked, we shared stories, we planned for the future. We laughed freely, without fear, without hesitation. I watched him sleep each night, knowing that he was safe, and for the first time in years, I slept peacefully too. The past could not touch us anymore. The man who had betrayed, manipulated, and deceived had been neutralized completely. Justice had been achieved, not through cruelty, but through precision, strategy, and resilience. And in that victory, I realized the depth of my own transformation. I had returned from absence, betrayal, and hardship stronger than ever, able to protect, guide, and nurture. My son's future was secure, our bond unbreakable, and our lives filled with potential and hope. I had fought, I had planned, I had acted, and now, finally, we were free. The sun set over our home, casting long shadows across the yard where my son played, where laughter and light filled every corner. I stood at the window, watching, reflecting, and understanding that this was more than victory. It was life reclaimed, a future secured, a love reaffirmed. The storm had passed, but the lessons, the strength, and the resilience would remain forever, guiding us through every challenge that might come. We were home, we were safe, and we were stronger than ever. And as I watched my son smile, run, and laugh freely, I knew with certainty that the life we had fought to reclaim was ours, and no one could ever take it from us again.